Now, Woodside Chairman Michael Chaney has lashed out at opponents of the planned $35 billion Browse liquefied natural gas plant in Western Australia's Kimberley. Speaking on Sky News Business, Mr Chaney labelled activists as anarchists who did not respect the legal process. In his strongest attack yet on the campaign to foil the project, Mr Chaney said Woodside and its Browse partners were following all the correct procedures and the developments would be approved next year if it was viable and met all environmental requirements. Mr Chaney's comments came in the same week that WA's Environmental Protection Authority recommended state government approval of the project at James Price Point. The agency, however, describing it as the most complex assessment in its 40-year history.
One of the most vocal and high-profile critics of Woodside's plans for James Price Point is Geoffrey Cousins, the former head of George Pat's, Howard Government Advisor and current Telstra board member. He joins us now from our studio. With the right of reply, I guess, Geoffrey Cousins, thank you for your time today. The reference was to anarchists, and it seems that you've been included in that reference. What's your response?
Oh, no, more than included. I think Michael Chaney specifically named me as an anarchist, and, you know, this is high praise indeed, to be grouped with people like Nelson Mandela, Leo Tolstoy, J.R.R. Tolkien and so many others. I'm amazed that Michael would offer me this high praise, but I don't think he quite meant it that way. He was, of course, a bit cranky about a piece I wrote in the Global Mail, which was highly critical of Woodside and its ignoring of the environmental and social factors concerning that project. And particularly you referred there to the EPA's decision, in quotes, to approve this project or recommend approval. I don't know whether you're aware of the fact that every single member of that authority had to excuse themselves from participating in the decision except the chairman, every one. Now imagine if that happened in the board of directors of Woodside or NAB, that every member of the board had to excuse themselves except the chairman. I think the shareholders would be looking for a new chairman.
Mr Cousins, we might just play you a little bit of some of the comments from Michael Chaney now. Just get your thoughts on what he does have to say.
Yeah.
The protesters are really a handful of people who are, I think, anarchistic in their approach. That is, they don't accept decisions of the umpire and they go their own way and try and stop projects. The project will proceed if those things occur, if all the regulations are met and the requirements, and if it's economically viable. We're spending $1.5 billion on a feasibility study to determine those things, and we'll know over the course of the next year what the answer is.
This is Mr Chaney there speaking last week on Australian Business. He's of the opinion that they've gone through all the right regulatory, the right environmental processes, and if that's the case, then what's the problem?
That was great corporate governance, was it, to have just one person make that recommendation. But the facts of the matter are that this project has been mired in controversy from the start. It was only just at the end of last year that the West Australian Supreme Court ruled that everything the West Australian government had done thus far in the compulsory acquisition process of the land for this was illegal. Talk about, you know, not following the rules. For goodness sake, this has been the case all along. But Michael Chaney seems to tag all protesters of anything as anarchists. Well, I can only assume, therefore, he hates Gina Rinehart getting up at rallies of protesters against the carbon tax. I can only assume he hates the big advertising campaign that the mining companies launched against the government. I can only assume that he is really in favour of the carbon tax since the umpire, the Parliament, has now passed it. I mean, what a ludicrous position to take in our society, that anybody who wants to express a contrary view to either the government's view or some company's view as an anarchist. I mean, come on, Michael, grow up.
I kind of get the sense you're secretly pleased at the reference, though, because really this shows that you are getting under their skin.
I think that's absolutely right. Look, I think that the facts are, as this project goes on, more and more opposition is coming to it, not less and less. I mean, the Aboriginal community, which was in the Kimberley, was at first unsure what to do. They were promised all sorts of things. And the thing that really annoyed me, frankly, about Chaney's comments is he didn't go to the substance of what I wrote in the Global Mail, where I referred to the ANU study that in the Pilbara, where Woodside's been for 40 years, and other mining companies have been there for the same period of time, the ANU study says the Aboriginal people haven't got a darn thing out of it. Their employment opportunities aren't any better, their health situation's no better, their educational situation is no better. 40 years those people have been there, and when those projects started, the then Premier of Western Australia said, this is all about helping Aboriginal people. It's a lot of nonsense. It's all about making a pile of money. That's what it's about.
Are you getting through, Mr Cousins? Because Mr Chaney suggests that the price point development will be a huge benefit. He lists for the states, the nation, as well as the Aboriginal people in the Kimberley. But do you think your message is getting through? Do you think they'll actually get this development up?
No, I don't think they'll get it up at that location. And I want to make it absolutely clear, I'm a businessman. I've been involved in some of the biggest projects in this country, for goodness sake. I'm not saying don't develop this resource. I'm saying develop it, but in a responsible way. You know, both JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch have published reports saying this project is just as viable if that gas is either piped down to the Pilbara, where there are already existing plants, or processed offshore, or a number of other options. You don't need to do it in this beautiful wilderness area. That's the only point I'm making. So yes, we're getting through, and all sorts of people are coming in. In a couple of weeks, the Sea Shepherd is sending the Steve Irwin up there on the whaling issue, because this is a great calving area for humpback whales, and Bob Brown and other well-known people will be on board. It's just growing, and Michael Chaney is starting to get a little nervous.
Geoffrey Cousins, you used the phrase corporate governance before. Do you have an issue with corporate governance standards of the Woodside board? Ultimately, is that what we're talking about? Because you've said, basically, it's unlikely the project proceeds in the Kimberley. As you said, environmentalists don't even have a problem with that if they put it some of these other options. Yeah. You've also supported the other options. So what is stopping that board making that decision?
Look, in fairness to the board, they didn't choose this site. The company did not choose this site. It was not their preferred site.
So why are they fighting to the death? What's your view?
The West Australian government and the federal government wrote it into their lease renewal conditions. And that was done for reasons of getting royalties earlier on, and not a lot else, quite frankly, other than that the WA Premier Colin Barnett wants to industrialise the Kimberley. So in fairness to the company, they didn't pick the site, and they had a gun put to their head. But now that they can clearly see all this opposition, it is very unwise of this board simply to continue down this path. Here's Chaney saying they're looking at alternate sites, and whilst he's saying that they haven't yet made a decision, they're ripping the land to pieces up there. They're destroying it right now. That's very wrong.
So are you saying the corporate governance standards are substandard? Let's get back to that for Woodside's board.
No, I'm not saying that, because I don't have sufficient knowledge of precisely what processes they're going to, but I'm saying the result of their decisions at the moment is very poor. They should not be ripping that land to bits, which they are. I've flown over it in a helicopter, and there are great gaping wounds in that beautiful country when, by their own admission, they haven't even decided whether to build this project.
Do you think a degree of ego comes into play here, not just on behalf of Mr Chaney, but you're a very prominent, high-profile businessman as well? It's almost like a bit of a clash of the titans. Is there a personality clash happening here between the two of you as well, based on ego?
Oh, I don't think personality clash, but look, I tell you what happens in these things. I've seen it a few times. I saw it with the Guns project in Tasmania, the pulp mill there. People get themselves locked into a position, and they don't know how to get out of it. Corporate hubris takes over, and they just believe that whatever they want is right. And even when it becomes clear that it's not, they don't know how to get out of it. And often they leave it too late, and careers get ruined, and as happened with Guns, shareholder value goes down. It's a very silly thing to do. Come out of the bunker, take a fresh look, and move forward.
Just a quick final question from me anyway, Geoffrey Cousins. To be clear, who actually in the end can pull the plug on the gas hub being there?
Oh, look, Woodside.
At James Price Point. It's just Woodside, or are there a number of things that could see that pull the plug?
Tony Burke, of course, the federal minister, could do that because they don't have any federal approval, and yet they're ripping the land to pieces. He could do that. My guess is the federal government isn't going to do that, but who knows? But obviously the board of the company is finally responsible. And they say they're looking at alternatives. Well, stop ripping the land up, move a bit faster on looking at the alternatives and make a decision. Most of the joint venture partners don't want it at James Price Point. BHP, Shell, Chevron, BP, they don't want it there. Why persist with this?
Do you have a dialogue? Do you have an open line of communication with Mr. Chaney? I mean, there's been an awful lot speculated about in the media as to the two of you. I mean, have you spoken to him recently, and what is the conversation like?
Well, I sat down with Michael Chaney and the previous CEO, Don Volti, quite some time ago. I've been trying to meet with the new CEO, Peter Coleman, for, I think, about a year and a half now. I keep getting messages that say, yes, he's happy to meet with me, but somehow he's never able to. A year and a half's an awfully long time not to be able to spend half an hour with someone. I'm available.
OK, we'll pass on the message. Geoffrey Cousins, appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.